What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing a mysterious portal, mysterious caves, and a mysterious disappearance. So I guess it's just a bunch of mysteries today. So we haven't talked about portals to other dimensions for a while here on this channel, so I thought I would take a chance, knowing that many of you don't like for me to go over the same thing week after week after week, and bring it to the channel in this week's video, along with some other things that I found that were interesting. As many of you are probably aware, I am completely convinced that there are an unlimited number of other dimensions and timelines besides ours. And I am always fascinated when I come across information where people have reported finding entrances to those places. They're all around us, these entrances. And while there are a lot of people out there who always say that I'm constantly speaking about dimensions, timelines, and portals on a metaphysical type level, I would like to set that record straight right now and with this video and tell you guys that sometimes there are doorways, either literal or physical, that could be somewhere like in a forest or in the woods, but only certain people can see them at certain times, and that's how the metaphysical and spiritual realm get brought into it. So they could be technically physically there, but you can only see it sometimes. They open at various times and close just as randomly. So it's really either how you're vibrating, whether or not you see them. And if you see them, whether or not you can enter. And then there's the fact that they just close randomly as well. So you don't know if you're going to be able to come back. I have always said that I would go through a portal to another realm or dimension in a heartbeat, but I'm honestly not so sure anymore, because where is it going to? How am I getting back? What's going on, you know? Didn't really think those things through in the beginning. Think about it though. How else would you get from modern day wherever you are to the ancient days of that same place? Well, like I said, sometimes it's vibration and accident, and sometimes in rare cases, it's someone or something on that side trying to bring you over there by any means necessary for whatever reason. However, with the more I learn and research into the subject of portals to other dimensions and doorways to other worlds, I am starting to notice that many of them end up being reportedly seen in the middle of the woods and out of the way in forests of the world. That makes me suspicious, as always, because this is where my mind always goes, of all of the missing people that seem to disappear under strange and bizarre circumstances in those exact same places. With all of that being said, I'll let you all see for yourselves what I'm talking about here, and let's jump right in. First, we're going to head to what was once known as the Canadian Northwest Territories. It could still be called that. I don't know. I don't know anything about Canada, and I don't know a lot about geography. Where, in the summer of 1968, a man named Alex M. was prospecting with his partner, Vino Heimelman, as they were both working for a Vancouver-based mining company in that area. The terrain was extremely rough, very desolate, and the two of them had spent upwards of 2 months there mining for mineral ore deposits without ever finding anything. It was somewhat boring and fairly uneventful until the last day that the two men were out there. These two men literally stumbled across something strange buried out there in the middle of the remote wilderness that began the strange story of how an interdimensional portal was uncovered in that Vancouver forest. For whatever reason, the two men were looking over the side of a cliff and saw a strange gorge in the earth below them with a flat gully at the bottom of it that measured 50 feet by 4 feet. Two round, large boulders were atop the gorge, and all around them were oddly shaped rocks of all shapes and sizes, most of which were covered with moss and lichen, as though they'd been there for a very, very long time. The strangest part of all of this, though, was a stagnant and unmoving tube-shaped fog bank that just hovered over that area and spread to nowhere else. The men were bored, and though they knew whatever they had found was anomalous and strange, at least it was interesting, and so they decided to further investigate it. Upon closer inspection, they saw that the larger rocks on top of the pile, the ones they had noticed first, were about 3 feet long in length and shaped like bananas. They were also made up of other much smaller rocks that were described as being, quote, translucent and similar to frogs' eggs, end quote. The smaller rocks were said by the men to be as smooth as glass and as small as a potato, and they collected some of them to further investigate them later on. Neither of them could identify what sort of mineral the rocks were, which was unusual for them because of their chosen profession, right? The men kept looking around the area and also found some teardrop-shaped pieces of smelted rock that looked to them like glass and slag, which to them looked like it had been produced by artificial mining activity, although they knew that there was none scheduled there at the time, and there also hadn't been any there in that area as far as they were aware. So there was no reason for them to find this type of stuff that indicated artificial mining activity because there was none in that area. As the two men discussed the puzzling things that they had just found, the fog that had been hovering there in the background and over the rocks themselves started churning and whirring around them. The men said it was looking at the fog that made them start to feel a weird energy in the air, like they weren't supposed to be there. And more than likely, they certainly weren't supposed to be. The men said it was looking at the fog that made them start to feel a weird energy in the air that made them feel like they were not supposed to be there. And they certainly weren't supposed to be seeing what they were, and they began to get very nervous in that particular area. To make things even more weird, there was a gigantic tree next to the foggy mass that had been uprooted and was lying on its side. The roots to the tree were huge. They were far too massive and going off in too many directions to have come from the gorge where the men were standing and where it was lying, and they couldn't for the life of them figure out how it had gotten there or where it could have possibly come from. As they discussed those things, Alex felt himself becoming more and more drawn to the foggy mass and began slowly creeping towards it as the two of them continued their conversation. He got close enough to where he should have been able to see right through it, but he noticed he couldn't see anything beyond it, and that made him more nervous, but also it made him more curious as to what exactly he and his friend had stumbled upon there. He felt like he was being compelled to keep walking towards the fog, and he took 2 or 3 slow and tentative steps inside of it to try and see if he could determine if there was anything of note in the woods behind it, since neither of them could see through it. Alex wrote a letter to his brother Bill about what happened next after he took those steps into the fog, and here's what he had to say, quote, "Approximately 2 steps into the mist, I saw a grassy field as far as my vision was capable of seeing at that time. The grass was about 1.5 foot tall at that point, and the more I advanced towards the grass, the higher the grass became. There was a wind blowing from the grass away from me. On entering the mist, my vision was limited to my left and my right. I advanced until the grass, brown colored, was approximately 3 feet. Then I decided to retreat, which I did. I cannot remember what the sky looked like. Gray colored seems correct. I decided to go back into the mist and cautioned myself not to walk into the grass. I went as far as the first time, and things weren't the same. As I advanced, the grass got taller, approximately 4 foot now, and my vision left and right got wider. Far off to my right, there was an oasis with medium-sized trees in a circle with 2 tall palm trees growing in the center of the circle. At that point, I had enough. At that time, my mind went completely blank except for one little piece of my brain that was fighting to take over my brain. Next, I was on my hands and knees with my brain powers intact, and I got out of there in record time." End quote. I don't know how he got out of there in record time, like what he was comparing that to, but I think he just means he beat feet pretty damn quickly out of there. At that point, once he finally dragged himself out of there, it seemed like it was just in the nick of time, too. Alex felt completely drained and utterly exhausted. He was hunched over with his head down and immediately started to wonder if it had all been real or just some sort of figment of his imagination. He remembered feeling menaced by the tall grass, and with that felt a dangerous feeling of dread and doom that a little voice in his head told him it would be dangerous to enter again, and so he didn't. He had no idea why it would have been dangerous, what the voice was, or even why he felt it was also dangerous. Only he did know it, and he knew it with absolute certainty. As Alex was still hunched over but back outside of the fog, he looked up and saw something even stranger, as he would later relate to his brother in a phone conversation, and his brother reported it all to the Center for UFO Studies, or CUFON, with a C, by saying, quote, "He looked up at the mist and saw 2 men looking at him. They were standing side by side at the edge of the fog and about 3 feet off the ground. They appeared to be about 6 feet tall plus, had long hair and long beards, salt and pepper hair, more salt colored. They appeared to be about 40 years old or so. They looked Caucasian, having facial features like ours, but he could not see any eyeballs. They looked like identical twins. They were wearing pale colored pants and robes that extended down midway between the knee and ankle and a belt around their middle. Both were wearing sandals. He looked back down at the ground and then back up at the two men in the mist. Now one is off to the side in the mist and behind the front man. So they're standing in front, one in front of the other. The man in the front was still standing while the man in the back seemed to be sitting on a chair that was not there. It was a lot more difficult to see him in the mist. The man in the back reminded him of the statue called the Thinker. Neither of them said anything. They only watched him. Alex said that at this point he was feeling quite shaken and decided to get back to camp. End quote. Okay, Alex didn't tell the man he had been working with there that day what he had seen in the mist, and he didn't tell anyone back at their satellite camp either. In fact, aside from his brother, he kept all of this to himself for years, the whole time considering going back and looking for what he described as the doorway to lead him back into the same place he had been in the first place with the two men in the misty fog. Before we move on to what happened next, guys, I'd like to briefly discuss and unpack what has been said so far by Alex about what he saw and experienced that day. When I went back to read what he initially reported, I thought immediately that maybe he was seeing some other world through the body of a person or entity from an alternate dimension or reality. The thing that got me, though, was why he wasn't merely an onlooker, but it seems as though he took on a whole new state of being and awareness, with his vision broadening with each step he took. I wonder if he went into some other realm instead of jumping into another timeline or dimension shifting. The only thing I could come up with was that perhaps he was in a more spiritually elevated place than human beings are supposed to ever find themselves in, and that his mind just really couldn't handle it. Then I read what his brother said that he told him about what happened next, and here's my thoughts on that. It leads me to believe even more than I already did that he was in some sort of spiritual realm or dimension and not another timeline on Earth as we know it. The lack of eyeballs on the men is what sealed the deal for me with that one, because entities who are spiritually elevated like that don't need to see, at least as far as we human beings need to see. They don't have the need for eyes or eyeballs, not really. For as creepy as that sounds, it is actually quite common. As far as what the men were doing with the Thinker image, they may have been on to the fact that someone, a human being, had somehow jumped whoever the other person was who was with them, there with them, with that being who or whatever Alex inadvertently jumped into. Meaning, those men were probably there with a third person. Or being, really. And Alex probably inadvertently jumped into that third being. Do I know this for sure? No. I'm taking an educated guess based on my professional opinion. Also, as I say a lot of the time, like if we're discussing it in live streams or even in other videos, if you see an entity in front of you, a spirit or a ghost, and it's 90% of the time, or even more than that, it's always reported that they're floating. They're not floating. They're vibrating at a different frequency and on a higher plane. That's why they're floating. So this was obviously somewhere like that because they were about 3 feet off the ground as far as what Alex reported. Moving on. So, while Alex went decades without talking about what he saw, he did send samples of the rocks into a Dr. Sinclair, who was a geologist. And Dr. Sinclair said that he had no idea what they could have possibly been and that he had never seen anything like them before. Alex really didn't ever tell anyone except his brother, whose name was Bill M. And then it was Bill who turned the information over to Sufan. It just feels weird saying that. Bill seemed to have been purposely and incredibly vague about the location of the so-called doorway, and when the center finally tracked down Alex, he confirmed that it was all true, but was seemingly very upset that the story had gotten out and was insistent that no one release his full name publicly ever to anyone. I think he was either disappointed, agitated, whatever it was, depending on who you ask, the way he was feeling about it. But the reason I think he was feeling so intensely about being contacted like that is because I think that maybe he was planning on going back there and thought the forces that be would move it or close it up somehow and he wouldn't be able to get back if he should choose. The other reason I thought of was that perhaps he was nervous his professional reputation or even maybe his personal one could have been tarnished because of it. There's always that third possibility that this whole thing was a farce, but I don't think so in this particular case. Hear me out. So why in the world would someone who was faking or lying about something this significant and seemingly traumatic then just go out of his way to keep it secret for decades and make sure that he never received any sort of publicity for the story or compensation? about what happened to him. It just doesn't make sense to me to make this up so that you can tell your brother a cool story. So since there was no other information available on this particular case, I was once again wondering what else to write about, and I came across something I thought would go nicely with the portal in the woods, and that's mystical caves and some possible strange disappearances connected to them. When just talking about caves in general, they can be somewhat creepy and spooky places, imposing and intimidating at best, and at worst inhospitable. Since time before time, caves have been the object of many legends and all sorts of mythical and mystical tales. So our first legendary and mysterious cave is located in Wisconsin in the United States. Before settlers arrived in the area, it said that 2 young boys from the Winnebago tribe went out to hunt for deer to bring back to their village somewhere among the bluffs along the Wisconsin River in that area. The weather was clear, and even for how young they were, as was usual in those days, the boys were already seasoned animal trackers and hunters, so no one was really worried about them at first when they either decided to go or were sent out to get the food for the village. However, once 2 days had passed with the boys not returning and no one in the village having seen or heard from them, everyone finally started to become concerned about the boys' well-being and safety, and the tribe's chief sent 10 men out to search for them and bring them back safely. This group of 10 men included the tribe's very best trackers, and it wasn't even a thought in anyone's head that they wouldn't just quickly go out, find the young boys, and bring them back home safely. But this is the Gemma Jade channel after all, and things always seem to have some sort of twist or strange ending to them here on this channel, so that's where we're going to take it now. Things got very strange indeed. While it took almost no time at all for the trackers to pick up the boys' scents, which apparently had them meandering all throughout the trees in the initial area of the forest where they had taken off from, this zigzagging path eventually brought the searchers to the mouth of a cave. There weren't any tracks leading away from the cave's entrance, and therefore the men figured out, for whatever reason, the boys had to have gone into the cave and not yet come out. 2 of the tribesmen were sent in to go and get the boys and bring them back out, while the other 8 stayed outside and waited for them to come back out with the kids. However, hours passed, and consistent calls to the 2 men and to the boys continued to go unanswered in that time, so the remaining men on the outside of the cave started discussing amongst themselves what they should do next. As they were doing that, they reported that they suddenly started hearing light singing, described by them as, quote, weirdly beautiful plaintive notes, end quote, coming out of the cave. The singing, or whatever it was said to have been so faint that the men could hardly hear it over the sound of the wind. So men started entering the cave to bring the others out, along with the boys, in groups of 2. Over and over again, no one would come out, and the others would wait hours and incessantly call out to them with no answer in return. 2 by 2 by 2, they trudged in there. Eventually, only 2 of the tribesmen of the 10 originally sent out to search for the boys remained, and those 2 smartly decided to go back and report to the chief about what happened while they were out there. They figured if 8 men and 2 boys had all gone into the cave and not come out, seemingly disappearing into the murky black darkness of it, then there was a good chance whatever had happened to them would happen again to those guys, and they wanted no part of it. I mean, they were smart guys. The chief's name was Great Eagle, and he had had enough, and he wanted not only the boys brought back to the village, but the 8 men he had lost the previous day as well. And so he sent 100 of his best men, all of them his best and greatest warriors, and all of them armed to the max, out to the cave the very next day. Great Eagle even went with them, and when they arrived at the cave's entrance the following morning, he had an idea. All of the men joined hands in order to create a sort of human chain so that whoever went into the cave would have a connection to the outside, and there was no risk of anyone getting lost or anything bad happening to any of them. Or so they thought. At some point, they were all lined up with their hands linked firmly together. The man who was second in front in the line realized that the hand that he had been holding only a second before, the man at the very front of the line was no longer holding his hand and had seemingly just vanished. Then he just vanished as well, and the third guy in line was feeling around in the dark and calling out for them, but they didn't respond, and there was no one out there. This continued right on down the line, with each person who was first in line mysteriously vanishing without a sound or trace left behind, leaving the next person in line to suffer the same fate, whatever that fate may have been. While I couldn't find how many men disappeared before everyone else finally realized what was happening, at some point they did figure it out, and the chain broke apart as they all ran for safety outside of the cave. The rest of them did make it out. Once outside, they all peered into the darkness, but there was nothing but it to greet them. Oh, and that mournful, sad song whispering through the darkness at them as well. The men were absolutely terrified, but remember, they were also warriors. So regardless of how scared they were, they remained undaunted in their quest to recover the young boys they had initially set out to look for, and every other member of their tribe and fellow warriors that they had lost in that cave up to that point. Great Eagle, in all his wisdom, decided to just tie a rope around one warrior's waist and send him in to see what was going on. If he were to sense trouble, be pulled away by something, or feel strange or odd for any other reason, he was to just turn and yell back out to Great Eagle and the rest of the tribesmen out there with him, and they would just quickly tug on the rope and pull him back out. That was the plan anyway. The warrior walked into the cave bravely as the others stayed on the outside but kept a firm grip on the rope connected to him. This all went as planned for like a minute or two and up to a certain point, but then the rope simply stopped moving and the men outside frantically tugged it back out in order to get the man to safety. However, it was too late and he was gone as well. He had also disappeared into the nothingness of that creepy darn cave. Great Eagle ordered the remaining men back to the village and deemed the cave to be forbidden territory. Despite ordering the entire village to stay away from that cave and even from the area outside of and around it, Great Eagle himself became completely obsessed with figuring out what was happening with it and how/why everyone was disappearing into it. Where were they going? What was going on? He visited there again not too long after the day he had last been there and lost so many of his greatest warriors, but when he peered in there, there was nothing to see but darkness, and even the song wasn't whispering in the wind at him that day. He decided to once again send his two best warriors out there again, probably because he was obsessed and obviously not thinking clearly. And with Native Americans, it's all about honor and dignity, obeying your chief. So they went without complaint into the cave that had swallowed up so many of their allies and friends already. The men made it through and even had to shimmy and crawl down on their stomachs because some of the caverns were too short and too narrow for them to fit through otherwise. Eventually, they did come to what was at the end of this cave, a room without any exit other than the entrance they had just shimmied in through. They could only see by the light of their torches, and that's actual torch, not British for flashlight, and what they saw was absolutely horrifying to say the least. Dozens upon dozens of human skeletons all piled up on top of one another and haphazardly lying about, all on their stomachs as if they were killed the moment they crawled into the room. Now, once they looked a little closer, they were even more terrified of what they had found. A lot of the skeletons had their arms outstretched as though they were reaching for something or someone. So lying on their stomachs, arms outstretched. And besides the piles, there was dozens of them laid out in some sort of lined formation, like someone or something had purposefully arranged them that way. They also said they saw an enormous stone there, which they believed someone must have thrown in there. And while I don't know why that's important at all, I do know that they hightailed it out of there as fast as they could, probably thinking that if they hung around any longer, they would be the next to be lying there in the formation on the floor of that murky and dank cave. The cave was sealed after they made their discovery, and over time the land around it hid it because no one was tending to it any longer. It was forbidden. The cave is called, quote, the Lost Death Song Cave, end quote, nowadays, and that's because it's still so hidden that no one can find it anymore, allegedly. It became somewhat obscure until the 1880s when a German immigrant named Paul Seifert, who was out searching the area for Native American artifacts so that he could sell them to collectors, just happened to stumble across it. He and an unnamed partner went into the cave and apparently ended up in the same cavern at the end with all of the human skeletons still all piled up and still with some lying in strange positions as if someone or something had carefully placed them that way. It was just as Great Eagle had reported to the tribe that day all those years before, perhaps centuries, except there was no beautiful and mournful melody in the air. Paul described what he and his companion heard by saying the sounds they heard that day coming out and echoing out from that cave were like, quote, the howling of a lot of maniacs and the moaning of the dying under torture, end quote. They noped the F out of there, and Paul and his companion never told a soul where the entrance they found was. Paul Seifert died in 1921, and he took the secret to the other side with him, so let's move on. In 1967, in Hannibal, Missouri, there was some construction being done on the highway, and the workers uncovered an intricate underground cave system. Mom, you have been asking me to cover the Hannibal Mines case for a while now. I stumbled upon it. Didn't even know I was going to be covering it today, so this one's for you, Mama. That wasn't strange in and of itself, because Missouri is known to this day to be home to more than 8,000 known caves. And in fact, at the time, Missouri was nicknamed the Cave State. But what was odd about it was the perplexing mystery it would soon become a part of. Some local boys and self-proclaimed adventurers named Joey and Billy Hogue, aged 13 and 11 respectively, decided to grab some shovels and flashlights and go out there to explore the cave system, which was called Murphy's Cave. The construction workers turned them away at first, and their parents found out about their little attempted underground excursion and forbade them to go back. The boys, though, were undeterred. The following day, they waited until after school and then snuck around through the construction site somehow, and they were able to get inside of the cave. That was May 9th, 1967, and some witnesses later came forward claiming to have seen the boys at the cave entrance at around 4:30 in the afternoon. The boys never went home that night, and the next day, a search was launched. MU, my favorite source for information, said of what happened next, quote, "Teams of searchers, the Mark Twain Emergency Squad, and the National Speleological Society scoured the cave as police volunteers and the Missouri National Guard combed the surrounding area for any signs of the boys, but there was nothing. Sniffer dogs followed the scent trail to the cave entrance, so it was assumed they must have entered, but it seems that they never came back out. Since the cave system was not particularly large or complex, it was seen as odd that they should so thoroughly disappear, and even odder that not a single sign of them could be found in the dank gloom. Interviews with locals and checks on trains and buses leading out of Hannibal also led nowhere, as did various visions given by psychics who were brought in out of desperation. The search lasted for nearly a month, but not a trace of the missing boys was ever found. Theories on what happened to what was now being called the Lost Hannibal Boys run the range. A construction accident, cave-in, serial killer, running away from home, and of course getting lost in the cave were all considered, but there is not a speck of evidence for any of it. A more bizarre detail that may or may not be related is that it would later turn out that there had been some UFO activity reported in the area not long before the boys vanished. Whatever the case may be, the 3 missing boys have not been seen since, and a plaque and stone monument sits atop the Lover's Leap Park overlooking the Mississippi River to honor their memory, end quote. Our next case involved a very smart, well-liked, and easygoing guy named Randy Wayne Leach. At around 6:45 p.m. on April 15th, 1988, Randy borrowed his mother's car to go to a friend's house. He was going to a party. Since the friend only lived about 5 miles away from their home in Linwood, Leavenworth County, Kansas, and the whole drive there would be through very safe neighborhoods and areas, and because it was so early in the night, and because Randy was such a responsible young man, his mother didn't think anything of it when he took the car. She was like, yeah, go have fun. He said he would be back later, and there was no reason for either of them to ever have thought that wouldn't be the truth. Randy got into the car to head to a party at a friend's house and would end up becoming a part of one of the country's most perplexing mysteries at that time, and the mystery has never been solved and therefore still endures to this very day. Now, what we do know about what happened that night is limited, but I'll tell you all what I was able to find. Randy stopped at a convenience store for gas and food before visiting a cousin. He then went to the body shop in DeSoto so that he could swoon over the 1966 Mustang his parents were restoring for him there. His parents were gifting it to him when he graduated school, which would have been soon. Randy didn't get to the party until between 9:30 and 10 o'clock that evening. There were up to 150 people at the party, all drunk, drinking, and even some were doing some sorts of drugs. Now, 4 different sources. They say 50, 100, 150, and 75. Those are the 4 numbers that I got as to how many people were at this party. That's why I said up to 150. It's still a major point of contention as to whether or not Randy had anything to drink. He was responsible all the time, not just sometimes. So it was more than likely that he wasn't planning on driving drunk. And while some of the other partygoers said they never saw him pick up a drink, most people there did agree that at some point in the night, he began to act strangely and started stumbling around as if he were intoxicated. No one actually saw Randy have a drink, though, and no one actually saw him leave the party either, so we don't know what time he left for sure. But people who were there do mostly agree that it was definitely after his curfew, which was 1 o'clock in the morning. That was strange itself because Randy always abided by the rules, and his curfew was one that he took very seriously and never ever broke, especially not without at least calling his mother or his parents to let them know he was running late. So at one point after 1 in the morning, Randy got into his car and basically drove off the face of the earth. It wouldn't be until the next morning when his parents woke up and saw he still wasn't home that any alarm bells started going off. After calling all of the friends they could think of to see if any of them knew where Randy was and having no luck, his parents immediately called the police. The investigation into Randy's disappearance started almost immediately with them going and interviewing partygoers and the people in the house where it was thrown as well. The police thought the witnesses were being purposefully vague about when Randy left and what he had done while he had been there, things like that. They just were not giving any answers up. It's probably because they were teenagers, they were young adults, and there was drug use, but it's very suspicious. If you're being interviewed in a murder investigation, guys, don't worry about the petty stuff, and drugs do become very petty when investigators are trying to get answers from you about a homicide. Trust me, I know. The police also thought that it was really strange that the house the party had been held in seemed to have been immaculately cleaned up. And they thought that was unusual because only a few hours before there had been a huge party with up to 150 teenagers and young people getting drunk and high there. But they didn't find any evidence to say one way or another what happened to Randy and couldn't prove if anyone was lying or withholding information or not. They had their suspicions. The only thing multiple people reported that they remembered about Randy that night was that he had been having trouble walking. Randy remained missing and no further evidence was ever able to be collected and no other witnesses came forward. Family members and the police posted the missing persons flyers everywhere all around town and then started looking for the car. They searched the area where he was last seen intensely and even combed a nearby river for his car, but it was all to no avail. Police initially suspected, or at least they suspected it after not finding any physical evidence at all as to where he went and with no witnesses coming forward, that Randy had simply had enough of his life and run away, not wanting to deal with his amazingly stressful life anymore, I guess. Obviously, Randy's family was adamant that wasn't the case, and he loved his life, and he was definitely looking forward to graduating and owning that Mustang that they were having restored for him. There were alleged sightings that seemed to back up the police's theories about him running away, but none of them could ever be substantiated. This is where the odd rumors started circulating about what could have and more than likely did happen to Randy Leach. Keep in mind as we go forward the time and place. This was Middle America, Kansas, the Bible Belt in the 80s, so there was definitely some satanic panic happening around that particular area, more so than the rest of the country, which is, if you're old enough to remember, really saying something. I'm an 80s baby, but I do remember like the late 80s constantly seeing things about satanic panic and Satan worshipers all over the news all the time. The main rumor going around about what happened to Randy Leach was that he had been captured by the robed and hooded satanic cult that roamed the woods with torches and chalices of blood near where the party was he had gone to the last night he was ever seen alive. They had abducted him in order to do sacrifice stuff on him and rituals, and that was basically the gist of that one. As you can tell, I take that one very, very seriously. I won't waste any more time other than those few sentences on that one because it's ridiculous and I'm kind of running out of time here. The police brought in several alleged Satanists throughout the years for questioning, but none of them were ever implicated in Randy's disappearance and none even were persons of interest, let alone actual suspects. There was only potentially one person who was a potential person of interest in this case. That was a young man named Steve Daughtry. He had attended the same party Randy was last seen at, and the next morning he was said to have been behaving suspiciously, driving 10 miles per hour on a back road instead of doing anything near the speed limit, which was 55. Yeah, that's it. That's the evidence. he was behaving suspiciously by driving 40 miles below the speed limit on a back road near where the party was the day after he attended it, the morning after, where he was probably drunk and just trying to take it easy and not get pulled over by the cops, drunk and or drugged driving. He eventually died, and whether or not he knew anything is still anyone's guess, but the case of Randy Leach, as I said, still remains unsolved to this day. So where does a cave come in? I really don't know. I wrote, where a cave comes in, I think, is that there were two young men who came forward years later and said that they had been kidnapped, of course, by Satanists, held hostage in a cave for several days. They went to the police and reported the incident, insisting that they also saw Randy's deceased body there in that cave as well. However, the police did search the cave, but not only did they not find Randy's remains, they found no evidence of any sort of cult or satanic activity ever taking place there, and it's anyone's guess why the young men would lie about it, but apparently they did. Randy's father did publicly commend the police investigating his son's disappearance at one point by saying that not only had they searched the cave, but they bulldozed it so that no one else's son could end up in there or anything like that. The police department publicly denied ever bulldozing the cave and said they did kind of a periphery search on it and found no evidence. Randy's parents insist that the police have botched the investigation from the very beginning. The first example they give is that the investigators waited far too long to search some of the area's many creeks. His parents also have complained that the department failed to follow up on some allegedly really great leads the way they should have, and one of the worst cases of how they dropped the ball was when they arrested a suspect in the 90s named Eric Montgomery. Eric had been convicted of 2 other homicides that took place in the same area where the party was held where Randy was last seen. He later claimed he and an accomplice killed people and put their bodies in barrels and then threw those barrels into the Missouri River. He eventually died in prison, with the police never having followed up to try to find out if Randy was one of their victims or not. Even stranger still is the fact that the police never mentioned to Randy's parents that they ever even had a suspect in custody, and the records of the brief questioning they did carry out on him were sealed by the courts, effectively keeping the public and the family from accessing them, and to this very day, the police involved refuse to release those records and cite no reason for it. The authorities have been constantly and consistently accused by the Leaches of not updating the family at all about anything going on with and in Randy's case, and all of that led them to them hiring their own private investigators. Well, yeah, they had to hire more than one private investigator because the first one they hired was very shortly thereafter found dead, both he and his wife having been shot in the head and killed. In what police said wasn't anything spooky at all. It was just a big coincidence and had been a murder-suicide. Whether the investigator or the wife was the murderer or the suicider, I really have no idea. Another investigator was brought in, and with help from a detective from the Leavenworth County Sheriff's Office named Dawn Weston, helped to bring in 3 men who were very quickly released soon after without any charges being filed against them. After that, both private investigators who were on the case and working for the Leaches with Detective Weston retired, left the state, and the only explanation either one of them ever gave was that they feared for their lives. The case of Randy Leach remains unsolved, and there has been absolutely no movement in the case at all for decades. Again, I don't know why this case was lumped in with mysterious cave disappearances, and because I only skim source material before writing my script so that I can have a more authentic reaction and response for you guys, I didn't realize any of that until it was too late and I already copied everything up to this point. It is worth mentioning, though, just on the basis that it's a strange and peculiar unsolved disappearance, and his family is still out there somewhere looking for answers. I'll end this with a quote from MU that sums it all up by saying, quote, "The case of the vanishing of Randy Leach remains totally unsolved even over 3 decades later. There have been no new leads, no new suspects, no additional evidence, and although it is occasionally revisited by authorities, it has largely been swept under the carpet and forgotten about. Randy Leach was officially declared dead in 2001, but he has never been found, and his family has continued over the years to investigate what happened to little success. Was the local law enforcement in on this? What role did cultists have to play in it, if any at all? What happened to those investigators? Why would anyone want to cover it all up? And was this just some freaky little town embroiled in some kind of strange stuff that they didn't want anyone to snoop into? If so, then why Randy Leach? Whatever happened to him, this grim case has gone on to become mired in a morass of weird mysteries, conspiracies, cover-ups, and strangeness that we will likely never be able to get through. End quote. Please let me know what you all think in the comments below, please. As always, I look forward to hearing your opinions and seeing your theories. I ran out of time before I got to discuss the most bizarre and strange disappearance involving a cave I have ever personally come across, and that's the case of Kenny Veach and the M Cave. If you all want me to talk about that, let me know, and I'll certainly make it happen. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me, and if you enjoyed hanging out with each other, if you attended Premiere. Spread the love by sharing this video. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure your notification bell is turned on. Live Intuitive Oracle with myself and Ghost Dragon ZW, 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time, either on Friday or Saturday, depending on which week it is. That is the only way I can keep that show going right now, guys, after almost 3 years of doing it on Wednesday. But it is the same time. It is the same place. I will keep posting all throughout the week which day it is. So the week that you are watching this on Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern, this is my pre-recorded. That week, Live Intuitive Oracle will be Friday, 7:15 p.m. And just keep going forward, and I'll keep mentioning it throughout the week. Just to give y'all something to do on Wednesday, since we don't do Live Intuitive Oracle anymore, Ghost Dragon ZW has started his own stream that he used to do on just hanging out, chill, and vibe at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday nights. Every once in a while, you will catch Miss Paranormal Pixie at 8 p.m. Eastern on my channel doing conversations with Lara, but that depends how she's feeling. She does have some, little health issues going on. Nothing to worry about, but let's keep her in our prayers and send her love and light as we always do. And then Saturday nights are when I'm not doing Live Intuitive Oracle. The alternate weeks, the Friday and Saturday, you will get live replays of my old videos with Ghost Dragon ZW. Again, I know it sounds confusing, but trust me, once we get into this groove for a month or two, you guys are going to totally be all over it. And I can't thank you enough for supporting me. Some things have come up that I've been getting some hate, not in the comments or from trolls, but from other people in the community, creators. Could you imagine being a 30, 35, 40-year-old woman or older and bullying another 40-year-old woman simply because you're jealous that she has so much confidence and likes herself so much? Listen, guys, I did shorts on it and I posted them and I felt kind of silly. So this is the only time I'm going to address this. I like the way I look. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not that person that's like, oh no, get out of here, I'm so ugly. No, stop, I'm so fat. I'm sorry. I like the way I look. I guess I'm not the cool girl, sitting on the bleachers. What's that song? She wears short skirts, I wear sneakers. No, I'm sorry. I'm not that girl that had the boy best friend that I pined over, okay? I was the cheerleader. I got the guy. And yeah, I've had a crazy life. But I'm not ashamed to admit that I used to be a horrible person, a mean girl. But at 40 years old, I'm a grown woman. I'm a mama. And I just don't believe in bullying. So listen, if you have a problem with me and you're experiencing some jealousy, just hit me up, sis. I'll help you get that confidence. Don't worry, I got you. Let's pray for those horrible people that are bullying me. Let's send them love and light and confidence and self-respect as women and mothers and professionals in the community. Sorry to sling that on here, but I had to say it. I couldn't keep quiet about it. I had to say it. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today you're beautiful, you're amazing, you got this. You can do anything you put your mind to. I believe in you. If nobody told you that, I definitely believe in you. GemmaJadeParanormal at gmail.com if you guys want to send in your encounters with the supernatural, paranormal, otherworldly, extraterrestrial, whatever lies in between. I am putting together a new listener stories. It'll be here within the month. I can say that definitely, and I'm actually really super duper excited about it because it's been about a year and a half. To donate to the channel, PayPal, Cash App, my Amazon wish list gift link in the description box. If you'd like a personal intuitive oracle, the general remote readings are $20 to my PayPal or Cash App. Just put reading or the month you want the reading for in the little note for PayPal or Cash App. And other than that, I will see you guys at Live Intuitive Oracle next. And Thank you. Thank you for all of your support. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger and at yourself in the mirror, and I'll see you guys next time.